The horse stumbled beneath her, hooves sliding on ice-crusted ground, and Phoebe Ashford knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die in this God-forsaken blizzard somewhere in the wasteland between Fort Worth and Dallas, Texas, in the bitter winter of 1883. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing at her threadbare cloak and numbing her face until she could barely feel her own features. Her fingers had lost all sensation hours ago, wrapped uselessly around the reins of a mount that seemed as desperate and confused as she was. The world had become nothing but swirling white darkness, and she had long since lost any sense of direction. She had left Fort Worth 3 days earlier with a merchant convoy heading to Dallas, but when the storm hit with sudden vicious fury on the second day, everything had fallen apart. The wagons had tried to circle up, but in the chaos and blinding snow, Phoebe's horse had spooked and bolted. She had fought to control the terrified animal, but by the time she managed to slow him down, the convoy was nowhere to be seen. She had called out until her voice was raw, but the wind swallowed every sound. Now she was alone, lost and freezing to death by degrees. Her body shook so violently that she could barely stay in the saddle. Her teeth chattered so hard she feared they might crack. The cold had moved beyond pain into a strange sort of numbness that she knew from her father's medical books was a dangerous sign. Dr. Ashford had taught his daughter many things before consumption took him 2 years ago, and one of those lessons was that when you stopped feeling cold, when drowsiness set in, death was already reaching for you with skeletal fingers. The horse stopped walking and she lacked the strength to urge him forward. Her eyes were closing. Just for a moment, she told herself. Just rest for one moment. The sound of hoofbeats cut through her fading consciousness. Or was she imagining them? She tried to lift her head, but her neck refused to obey. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, and a voice spoke, deep and urgent, though the words seemed to come from very far away. Then she was falling, though falling felt almost warm compared to the saddle. Someone caught her, and she smelled leather and wood smoke and horse. Arms lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all, and the world swayed and darkened. She woke to warmth. Glorious, painful, terrible warmth that made her extremities burn and ache as sensation returned. She gasped and tried to sit up, but gentle pressure on her shoulder kept her down. "Easy now," that same deep voice said. "You are frozen half to death. Do not move too quickly." Phoebe forced her eyes to focus. She was lying on a bedroll near a fire in what appeared to be a small cave or rocky overhang. The flames danced and flickered, casting golden light on stone walls. A man knelt beside her, and even in her disoriented state, she registered several things at once. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell nearly to his collar and a face that was all strong angles and weathered planes. His eyes were an unusual color, somewhere between gray and blue, like storm clouds over water. He looked to be perhaps 27 or 28 years old, with the kind of face that had seen hardship but had not yet grown hard itself. "Where am I?" she managed to croak. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "About 15 miles northwest of Dallas," he said. "I have a line camp in these hills for winter grazing. Lucky I was checking on the cattle when I spotted your horse." "The convoy," she whispered. "I was with a merchant convoy from Fort Worth." "You will not find them in this storm," he said bluntly. "And if you had stayed out there another hour, I would have found a frozen corpse instead of a woman." He reached for something beside him and brought up a tin cup. "Drink this, slowly." The liquid was warm broth, rich and salty, and it tasted like the finest thing she had ever consumed. She sipped carefully, and warmth began to spread through her chest. Her shaking began to ease slightly. "Thank you," she said when she had drunk half the cup. "You saved my life." He shrugged, a movement of broad shoulders under a worn wool shirt. Any decent man would have done the same. "I am Phoebe Ashford," she said. "From Philadelphia originally, though I have been in Texas for 2 years. "Xander Malone," he replied. "I run cattle for the Double Bar H Ranch, about 20 miles south of here." Phoebe tried to sit up again, and this time he helped her, supporting her back until she was propped against her saddle, which she now saw was among the gear arranged near the cave wall. Her horse, she noticed, was picketed near the entrance next to a larger bay gelding. Both animals stood with their backs to the wind, heads down, waiting out the storm. "How long was I unconscious?" she asked. "Maybe an hour," Xander said. He moved to tend the fire, adding wood from a neat stack. "You were in bad shape. I got you out of those wet things and wrapped you in dry blankets. Your clothes are drying over there." He nodded to where her dress and cloak hung on a makeshift line near the fire. Phoebe looked down and realized she was indeed wrapped in blankets, wearing what appeared to be a man's long underwear top. Heat rushed to her face that had nothing to do with the fire. Xander saw her expression and held up a hand. "I promise I was respectful about it. But wet clothes in this cold will kill you as sure as a bullet. I have seen men freeze to death in their own sweat-soaked shirts." "I understand," Phoebe said quickly. "Truly, I am grateful. I know you did what was necessary." She paused. "But I imagine that having me here, dressed in your clothes, alone with you in this cave, might cause talk if anyone knew." Something flickered in Xander's eyes. "I do not much care what people say," he said quietly. "Let them talk. I was not about to leave you to die because of propriety." There was a story behind those words, Phoebe sensed. A reason why he spoke of gossip with such tired dismissal, but she was too exhausted and too grateful to pry. "How long will the storm last?" she asked instead. Xander walked to the cave entrance and looked out at the howling whiteness. "Hard to say. Could be a few hours, could be a day or more. We have supplies enough either way. I keep this camp stocked for emergencies." He was right about that. Looking around, Phoebe could see tin cans, sacks of flour and beans, and other provisions stacked against the cave wall. There was gear for cooking, extra blankets, even some books wrapped in oilcloth. This was clearly a well-used shelter, not just a random refuge. "You spend much time here?" she asked. "In winter, yes," Xander said, returning to the fire. He settled himself on his own bedroll across from her, maintaining a careful, respectful distance. "The ranch keeps cattle in these hills during the cold months because there is decent grazing in the valleys and shelter from the worst weather. I ride out every week or so to check on them, make sure we have not lost any to wolves or cold. Usually I make it back to the main ranch house before dark, but with this storm, I figured it was safer to wait it out here." "And then you found me," Phoebe said. "And then I found you," he agreed. "What brings a Philadelphia lady to Texas, if you do not mind my asking?" Phoebe wrapped the blanket more tightly around herself. "My father was a doctor. When my mother died of yellow fever, he wanted a fresh start, so we came west. He set up practice in Dallas, and for a while, things were good. But then he contracted consumption. He lasted a year before it took him." "I am sorry," Xander said, and his voice held genuine sympathy. "After he died, I tried to maintain myself on the small savings he had left," Phoebe continued. "I took work as a seamstress, and I helped occasionally at the new doctor's office since I had learned so much from my father. But it has been difficult. When I heard that a wealthy family in Fort Worth needed a governess, I traveled there to interview. They decided to hire someone with more formal training, so I was returning to Dallas with the merchant convoy." She gave a rueful smile. "I suppose I should have waited for better weather." "You could not have known the storm would be this bad," Xander said. "Even I did not expect it to hit so hard." We get cold winters here, but this is unusual even for January." They fell into silence for a moment, listening to the wind shriek outside. The fire crackled and popped, and the cave felt almost cozy in contrast to the frozen hell beyond its shelter. "Why did you say you do not care who talks?" Phoebe asked suddenly. "Earlier, when I mentioned people gossiping, you sounded like you had experience with that." Xander's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he sighed and poked at the fire with a stick. "2 years back, I was engaged to a woman named Catherine Wells," he said slowly. "Her father owned a big spread east of Dallas, and she was beautiful and educated, and everything a man was supposed to want. We courted proper, with chaperones and Sunday dinners and all the rest. Her father approved the match because I had good prospects, a position with the double bar H that came with decent pay and the promise of eventually managing my own section." He paused, staring into the flames. But Catherine had certain ideas about what married life would be like. She thought I would settle down, maybe work in town, take a position at her father's ranch that would keep me close to the big house. When I told her I loved the work I did, loved spending time with the cattle and the open range, loved this rough life out in the hills, she laughed. Said I would change my mind once we were married, said she would make sure of it. Phoebe listened quietly, sensing there was more. "I started to realize we wanted completely different lives," Xander continued. "She wanted society and dinner parties and a husband who wore a suit more often than chaps. I wanted the life I already had, so I broke off the engagement, tried to do it respectfully, told her we simply were not suited. And she did not take it well," Phoebe guessed. Xander laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She told everyone I had compromised her honor and then abandoned her, said I was a brute who had taken liberties and then cast her aside when she would not do more. It was all lies, every word. We had never been alone together without a chaperone, had barely held hands, but people believed her because she was a woman of standing and I was just a cowboy. Her father threatened to ruin me, tried to get me fired from the double bar H. But you kept your position," Phoebe said. "My boss, Henry Hutchins, knew me better than that," Xander said. "He told Wells that he trusted me completely, and if anyone had questions about my character, they could take it up with him. Henry is well respected, and that quieted some of the talk. But there are still people in Dallas who look at me sideways, who whisper when I come to town. Catherine eventually married a banker from Austin, so she got what she wanted in the end. But the whole thing taught me that reputation is a fragile thing, and sometimes doing the right thing costs you anyway. So when you found me, and you knew what people might say about us being alone together," Phoebe said slowly, "you decided that saving my life mattered more than protecting yourself from more gossip." "Something like that," Xander said. He met her eyes across the fire. "I have learned that you cannot live your life worrying about what small-minded people think. You do what is right and let the rest sort itself out." Phoebe felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the blankets. Here was a man who had been wounded by gossip and lies, yet he had not let it make him bitter or selfish. He had risked his already damaged reputation to save a stranger's life without hesitation. "That is a rare quality," she said softly. "I have known many people who would have ridden past, told themselves it was too risky, that they could not afford more scandal." Xander shrugged. "Then you have known the wrong people." They talked through the afternoon as the storm continued to rage outside. Xander proved to be surprisingly easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor and a keen intelligence that belied his rough occupation. He told her about growing up in Missouri, the son of a farmer who had lost everything to a bank foreclosure. How he had come to Texas at 18 with nothing but a horse and a saddle, determined to make his own way. How he had worked his way up from the lowest ranch hand to a trusted position with real responsibility. Phoebe, in turn, told him about Philadelphia society, about her mother's love of music and her father's dedication to healing, about the shock of coming to Texas and finding a world so different from everything she had known, about the loneliness of the past 2 years, struggling to make a life in a place where she had no real connections, no family, no sure place. As evening came on, Xander cooked a simple meal of beans and salt pork, with biscuits made in a small Dutch oven he buried in the coals. Phoebe, now warm and dry and feeling more human, insisted on helping despite his protests. They worked together in the small space, and Phoebe noticed how careful he was to avoid unnecessary contact, how he maintained that respectful distance even as they shared the simple domestic task. "Your clothes should be dry soon," Xander said as they ate. "The storm sounds like it is easing off some. If it clears by morning, we can ride for Dallas. It is only a few hours in decent weather." "I hate to take you away from your work," Phoebe said. "The cattle will be fine for a day," Xander assured her. "And I am not about to let you ride alone after what just happened. I will see you safely to town." After dinner, Phoebe's exhaustion caught up with her again. The ordeal of the day, combined with the warmth and full stomach, made her eyelids impossibly heavy. Xander noticed her struggling to stay awake and smiled. "Get some rest," he said. "I will keep the fire going and keep watch. You are safe here." Phoebe wanted to protest, to insist she could take a turn at watch, but her body had other ideas. She lay down on the bedroll, wrapped snugly in blankets, and was asleep within minutes. She woke once in the deep night, disturbed by some change in the air. The wind had finally died down, and the silence was profound after hours of howling. In the dim glow of the banked fire, she could see Xander sitting with his back against the cave wall, a rifle resting across his knees, watching the entrance, watching over her. Something about the sight, about the solid dependability of his presence, made her feel safer than she had in months, maybe years. She closed her eyes and slept again. Morning brought clear skies and a landscape transformed into a winter wonderland. Everything was covered in a thick blanket of white, glittering in the early sunlight like diamond dust. It was beautiful and deadly, and Phoebe was profoundly grateful to see it from the shelter of the cave rather than lost and dying in it. Xander was already up, tending the horses and checking their gear. Phoebe's clothes, now thoroughly dry, were folded neatly and placed by her bedroll. She dressed quickly while he was outside, grateful for the privacy and for the return of her own garments. When she emerged from the cave, Xander was saddling the horses. He looked up and gave her an appraising glance. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Any lingering effects from yesterday?" Phoebe took stock of herself. Her fingers and toes were still a bit tender, and she felt exhausted, but otherwise she seemed to have escaped serious harm. "I think I will live," she said. "Thanks to you." "Good," Xander said. He finished tightening the girth on her horse's saddle and turned to his own mount. "We should get moving. The temperature will rise as the sun gets higher, but it is still bitter cold. We will take it slow and steady." The ride to Dallas was nothing like Phoebe's terrified flight through the blizzard. With Xander leading the way, following trails she could not even see beneath the snow, the journey felt almost pleasant despite the cold. He kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks, telling stories about the area. Phoebe realized he was making sure she stayed alert and focused, preventing the drowsiness that could lead to accidents or worse. They stopped once to rest the horses and share some jerky and hardtack from Xander's saddlebags. Phoebe stamped her feet and swung her arms to keep the blood flowing, and Xander watched with approval. "You are tougher than you look," he observed. "Many women raised in Philadelphia society would be in hysterics after what you went through." "My father believed women should be educated and capable," Phoebe said. "He taught me that intelligence and resilience are not masculine traits, they are human ones. I may have been raised in society, but I was never taught to be helpless." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man," Xander said. "He was," Phoebe agreed softly. "I miss him terribly." They rode on, and by early afternoon the buildings of Dallas came into view. Phoebe felt a complicated mix of relief and something else she could not quite name. Disappointment, perhaps. The time with Xander had been strange and unexpected, but also something precious. She knew that once they reached town, this brief connection would end. He would return to his ranch and his cattle, and she would return to her precarious existence as a seamstress, barely making ends meet. As they entered the outskirts of Dallas, Xander spoke. "Where should I take you? Do you have lodgings?" "I have a small room above the general store on Main Street," Phoebe said. "The owner, Mrs. Henderson, rents it to me cheaply in exchange for mending and alterations." Xander nodded and guided them toward the center of town. Dallas was not a large place in 1883, though it was growing. The arrival of the railroad 2 years earlier had brought new prosperity, and new buildings were going up all the time. Still, it had the rough edges of a frontier town, with saloons and gambling halls sitting alongside churches and shops. People stopped to stare as they rode past. Phoebe saw women whispering behind their hands, men exchanging knowing looks. She realized how it must appear, her returning to town in the company of a single man, clearly having spent time alone together. The fact that he had saved her life, that everything had been proper, would matter little to the gossips. Beside her, Xander's jaw tightened, and she knew he saw it too. Knew he understood that the very thing he had said he did not care about was already beginning. They reached the general store, and Xander dismounted first, then came to help Phoebe down. His hands were steady on her waist, his touch brief and respectful, but Phoebe felt the contact like a brand. She looked up into his face, seeing the concern there. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I had hoped to get you back without causing you trouble." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Phoebe said firmly. "You saved my life, Xander. Whatever anyone says, that is the truth of it. Mrs. Henderson," a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, came bustling out of the store. "Miss Ashford, thank the Lord you are alive. The convoy returned yesterday without you, and there has been such a fuss. Some wanted to send out search parties, but with the storm, nobody would venture out." Her gaze shifted to Xander, assessing and not entirely approving. "I see you found assistance." "Mrs. Henderson, this is Xander Malone," Phoebe said. "He found me lost in the blizzard and gave me shelter at his line camp. I would be dead without his help." "I am sure," Mrs. Henderson said in a tone that suggested she was not sure at all. "Well, come inside, Miss Ashford. You must be frozen through." "Mr. Malone, thank you for returning her safely." It was a dismissal, clear and pointed. Xander recognized it and took a step back, but his eyes remained on Phoebe. "If you need anything," he said. "Anything at all. The Double Bar H Ranch is south of here. Anyone can give you directions." "Thank you," Phoebe said, wishing she could say more, wishing Mrs. Henderson was not standing there watching everything with those hawk eyes. Xander tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode away. Phoebe watched him go, feeling as though something important was slipping away with him. "Well," Mrs. Henderson said briskly, "let us get you inside and warmed up. Then you can tell me the whole story." The whole story, as Phoebe quickly discovered, was not what Mrs. Henderson or the rest of Dallas society wanted to hear. They wanted scandal and impropriety, not a simple tale of rescue and survival. By the next morning, the rumors were flying. Phoebe heard them in the whispers at church, in the suddenly cool greetings from women who had previously been cordial. She overheard two ladies in the general store speculating about what had really happened in that cave, about whether poor Miss Ashford had been compromised, about whether that Cowboy Malone had taken advantage of the situation. Phoebe held her head high and ignored it all. She had survived a blizzard and near death from freezing. She was not about to let small-minded gossip break her spirit, but she could not help thinking about Xander, about how he had been through this before, about how this was exactly what he had said he did not care about. Yet he had helped her anyway. She went back to her work, taking in mending and alterations, helping occasionally at Dr. Preston's office when he needed an extra pair of hands. The days passed, and the gossip began to die down, replaced by fresher scandals. Phoebe told herself she was relieved. Told herself it was better this way, that the brief connection with Xander had been just that, a brief moment of connection in a crisis, nothing more. But she found herself thinking about him constantly, about his steady presence and dry humor, about the way he had maintained such careful respect even in the intimate confines of the cave, about the kindness in his eyes and the strength in his hands, about the way he had spoken of doing what was right regardless of the cost. She was thinking about him, in fact, when Mrs. Henderson called up the stairs 2 weeks after her return to Dallas. "Miss Ashford, you have a visitor." Phoebe set aside her sewing and descended to the shop, assuming it was Dr. Preston needing help with a patient. Instead, she found Xander standing near the counter, hat in hands, looking somewhat uncomfortable amid the bolts of cloth and sewing notions. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Mr. Malone," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "this is a surprise." "Miss Ashford," he said, and there was relief in his voice at seeing her. "I hope I am not intruding. I was in town for supplies and wanted to check that you were well. After your ordeal, I have been worried." "I am perfectly well," Phoebe assured him, "thanks to your quick action." They stood there, suddenly awkward, unsure what to say under Mrs. Henderson's interested gaze. Finally, Xander cleared his throat. "I wonder if you might take a walk with me," he said. "If you have time, that is. It is a fine afternoon, and I thought perhaps you might like some air." Phoebe knew she should refuse, knew that being seen with him would start the gossip all over again, knew that the smart, safe thing to do was to thank him politely and send him on his way. "I would like that very much," she heard herself say. She fetched her cloak, ignoring Mrs. Henderson's disapproving frown, and stepped outside with Xander. Dallas was busy in the afternoon, with wagons rumbling past and people going about their business. Xander offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and Phoebe took it. They walked toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. Neither spoke for a while, and the silence was comfortable rather than strained. "I have been thinking about you," Xander said finally, "wondering if the gossip had been as bad as I feared it might be." "There was some," Phoebe admitted, "but it has died down. People always find something new to talk about." "I am sorry nonetheless," Xander said. "You did not deserve that after what you had been through." "You warned me it might happen," Phoebe said, "and I told you then that I did not blame you." "I still do not. You saved my life, Xander. A little gossip is a small price for that." They reached a small rise overlooking the town, and Xander stopped, turning to face her. His expression was serious, almost troubled. "I need to be honest with you," he said. "I did not come to town just for supplies. I came because I have not been able to stop thinking about you since I left you at the general store. About our time in the cave, about the way we talked, about how easy it was to be with you. I know we barely know each other, and I know my reputation in this town is already damaged, and I have no right to ask anything of you. But I had to see you again." Phoebe's breath caught. She had told herself she was imagining the connection between them, that it was just gratitude and the intensity of shared danger. But hearing him put it into words, seeing the vulnerability in his face, she knew it was real. "I have been thinking about you too," she said softly. "More than I should, probably. More than is sensible." "Nothing about this is sensible," Xander said with a slight smile. "But I have learned that sense is not always the same as right. Would you allow me to call on you properly? I know I am not much of a prospect. I am a cowboy with modest means and a tarnished reputation. But I am honest, and I work hard, and I would treat you with the respect you deserve." Phoebe looked up at this man who had risked everything to save her, who stood before her now offering not pretty lies but honest truth about what he could provide. She thought about the emptiness of the past 2 years, about the loneliness and struggle. She thought about how alive she had felt talking with him in the firelight, how safe she had felt under his watch. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." The smile that spread across Xander's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He took her hand carefully, reverently, as though she were something precious. "I will do this right," he promised. "Proper courtship out in the open. Let people see that my intentions are honorable. I will not give them cause to talk about you." "They will talk anyway," Phoebe said. "You know that." "Let them," Xander said, echoing his words from the cave. "I've got room by the fire for you, Phoebe Ashford, and I do not care who talks." From that day forward, Xander became a regular presence in Dallas. He would ride in on Sunday afternoons, and he and Phoebe would take walks through town, or sit in the parlor of the boarding house, where Mrs. Henderson could chaperone with her ever-watchful presence. They talked about everything. About books and ideas, about dreams and disappointments, about the lives they had lived and the lives they hoped to build. Xander told her more about his work on the ranch, about the satisfaction of seeing cattle thrive under his care, about the beauty of the open range under stars. Phoebe told him about her father's medical practice, about the patients she had helped treat, about her own frustrated desire to learn more about healing, but knowing that no medical school would accept a woman. "Why not?" Xander asked, genuinely puzzled. "If you have the knowledge and the skill, why should it matter whether you are a man or woman?" "It should not," Phoebe said. "But it does. The world is not always logical or fair." "Then maybe it needs changing," Xander said simply. They had been courting for 6 weeks when the first real test came. Catherine Wells, now Catherine Morris, returned to Dallas for a visit with her family. Phoebe was working in Dr. Preston's office, assisting with a patient who had come in with a badly infected hand, when Catherine swept in with her mother. Catherine was indeed beautiful, with golden hair and porcelain skin, dressed in the latest fashion from Austin. She looked at Phoebe with sharp, assessing eyes and a smile that did not reach her face. "Mother has a headache," she announced. "She needs something for it." Dr. Preston emerged from the back room, wiping his hands. "Mrs. Wells, how can I help you today?" while the doctor tended to Mrs. Wells. Catherine drifted around the office, examining the bottles and instruments with apparent idle curiosity. But Phoebe could feel the woman's attention on her, could sense the calculation behind those pretty eyes. "You must be Miss Ashford," Catherine said suddenly. "I have heard so much about you." "Have you?" Phoebe said neutrally. "Oh yes," Catherine said. "They say you were lost in that terrible blizzard and Xander Malone found you. How fortunate for you that he happened to be nearby." The way she said it made it sound like anything but fortunate. "It was indeed," Phoebe said calmly. "He saved my life." "How gallant of him," Catherine said. "Though I must say I was surprised to hear he was courting again. After our engagement ended so badly, I thought he had sworn off women entirely. He was quite devastated, you know, when I had to break things off. Phoebe kept her expression neutral, though she knew perfectly well that Catherine's version of events was the opposite of the truth. I understood that he was the one who ended the engagement, Phoebe said mildly. Catherine's smile tightened. Is that what he told you? How kind of him to save his pride. But we both know the truth of why I could not marry him. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. He can be quite rough, you know, quite improper. I suppose some women do not mind that sort of thing, but I was raised with certain standards. Phoebe felt anger kindle in her chest. She thought of Xander's careful respect, his deliberate distance even when they were alone and half frozen in a cave. She thought of his gentle hands and kind eyes, and the way he had never once made her feel unsafe or uncomfortable. I find Mr. Malone to be a perfect gentleman, Phoebe said clearly. The most honorable man I have ever known, in fact. Catherine's eyes hardened. Well, she said, perhaps your standards are different than mine, but do be careful, Miss Ashford. Xander Malone is not what he seems. Ask anyone in Dallas. They will tell you what kind of man he really is. I know exactly what kind of man he is, Phoebe said, and I consider myself fortunate to know him. Dr. Preston finished with Mrs. Wells and returned to the front room, effectively ending the conversation. Catherine swept out with her mother, but not before giving Phoebe one last appraising look that promised this was not over. That evening, when Xander came to call, Phoebe told him about the encounter. She watched his face carefully as she spoke, saw the old pain flicker in his eyes when she mentioned Catherine's name. She is trying to poison you against me, he said quietly, just like she poisoned half the town. She cannot poison me against the truth, Phoebe said. I know you, Xander. I know what kind of man you are. Her lies do not change that. Xander took her hand, holding it gently. You should know that if you continue with me, Catherine will not be the only one who tries to interfere. There are people in this town who will never believe the truth, who will always think the worst of me. Then they are fools, Phoebe said firmly, and I do not care what fools think. Xander smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes. You are remarkable, Phoebe Ashford. I am practical, Phoebe corrected. I know what I have seen with my own eyes and heard with my own ears. I trust my own judgment over gossip. Spring came to Texas with a rush of warmth and wildflowers. The harsh winter gave way to mild days and cool nights, and the land transformed from brown and white to vivid green and gold. Xander brought Phoebe out to see the ranch, introducing her to his boss Henry Hutchins and his wife Martha. The Hutchins were in their 50s, weathered and capable, and they clearly thought the world of Xander. Martha took to Phoebe immediately, sitting with her on the porch of the ranch house while the men looked at cattle. That boy is like a son to us, Martha said, rocking gently in her chair. When all that ugliness happened with the Wells girl, it near about broke Henry's heart to see how people turned on him. But Xander never let it make him bitter. He just kept doing good work, being a good man, and waited for folks to come around to the truth. Have they? Phoebe asked. Come around, I mean. Some have, Martha said. Some never will. But the people who matter, the people whose opinions are worth having, they know what kind of man he is. She looked at Phoebe shrewdly. He is happier than I have seen him in years, Miss Ashford. You have been good for him. He has been good for me too, Phoebe said honestly. That evening, Xander took her riding across the ranch land. They stopped on a high bluff overlooking a valley where cattle grazed peacefully. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the air smelled of grass and mesquite. This is what I love, Xander said, gesturing at the landscape spread before them. This freedom, this wildness. I know it is not refined or cultured. I know it is hard work and rough living, but it feeds my soul in a way nothing else does." "I can see why," Phoebe said. The beauty of the land was undeniable, raw and real in a way that Philadelphia's manicured parks had never been. "It is honest. There is no pretense out here, no putting on airs. Everything is exactly what it is." "That is it exactly," Xander said. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Phoebe, I know we have only been courting for a few months. I know the proper thing would be to wait longer, to follow all the rules of courtship. But I have never been one for unnecessary rules, and I find I cannot wait any longer to ask you something." Phoebe's heart began to beat faster. She knew what was coming, had been half hoping and half fearing it for weeks. "I love you," Xander said simply. "I think I have loved you since you sat across the fire from me in that cave and looked at me like I was just a man, not a scandal or a disappointment or a problem to be managed. You see me for who I really am, and you seem to like what you see. That is a gift I never thought to have." He dismounted and came to stand beside her horse, looking up at her with those storm cloud eyes. "I know I cannot offer you the life you were raised for," he continued. "I cannot give you society dinners or servants or a big house in town. What I can offer is a simple life on a ranch, honest work, and a man who will love you and respect you every day for the rest of his life. Will you marry me, Phoebe Ashford? Will you take a chance on a cowboy with a damaged reputation, and let me spend the rest of my days proving you made the right choice?" Phoebe looked down at him, at this strong, kind man who had saved her life in more ways than one, who had shown her what real integrity looked like, who made her laugh and made her think and made her feel things she had thought herself too practical to feel. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Xander's face blazed with joy. He reached up and lifted her down from the horse, his hands sure and steady. For a moment they just stood there, holding each other as the sun set behind them, and Phoebe felt a sense of rightness so profound, it was almost overwhelming. When Xander kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was the kiss of a man who understood that love was not about possession or passion alone, but about partnership and respect and choosing each other every day. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church in Dallas. It was a simple affair, with Martha Hutchins standing up for Phoebe and Henry for Xander. Dr. Preston attended, and a few of Phoebe's acquaintances from town. Mrs. Henderson came, still slightly disapproving but unable to deny that the courtship had been proper and above board. Catherine Wells Morris did not attend, but her presence was felt in the whispers and sideways glances from some of the townspeople. Phoebe ignored them all. She stood beside Xander in her simple dress, a dress she had sewn herself from good sturdy cloth, and spoke her vows with a clear voice and full heart. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Xander kissed her in front of God and everyone, a kiss that said he was proud to call her his own and did not care who disapproved. They moved into a small house on the Double Bar H property, a foreman's cottage that Henry had offered when Xander proposed. It was nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a porch, but Phoebe had never been happier anywhere in her life. She made curtains for the windows and planted a garden and turned the little house into a home. Life on the ranch was hard work, but it was satisfying in ways Phoebe had never experienced. She helped with the cattle when needed, learning to ride better and to handle livestock. She used her medical knowledge to tend minor injuries and ailments among the ranch hands, effectively becoming the ranch's unofficial doctor. And she continued to help Dr. Preston in town when he needed her, riding in once or twice a week to assist with patients. Her relationship with Xander deepened and matured in those early months of marriage. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, learned to navigate disagreements with respect and humor, learned the thousand small intimacies of sharing a life. Xander was as honorable in marriage as he had been in courtship, treating Phoebe as an equal partner rather than a subordinate. He asked her opinion on ranch matters and listened seriously to her suggestions. He encouraged her interest in medicine and never suggested she should confine herself to domestic concerns. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Phoebe told him she was pregnant. Xander went very still. Then he turned to her, his face full of wonder and something like fear. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am a doctor's daughter," Phoebe said with a smile. "I know the signs." "Are you happy about it?" Xander asked carefully. "I know we have not talked much about children, and if you are not ready, if you are worried, I want you to tell me." Phoebe took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "I am happy," she said. "A little scared, maybe, but happy." "Are you?" "Terrified," Xander admitted. "And happier than I have words for." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Phoebe continued working as long as she felt able, finally stopping only in the last month when her size made riding uncomfortable. Dr. Preston had agreed to attend the birth, and Martha Hutchins had promised to be there as well. In February of 1884, on a cold, clear night with stars blazing overhead, Phoebe went into labor. Xander rode for the doctor while Martha stayed with her, and for the next several hours, Phoebe learned what her father had meant when he told her that childbirth was the hardest work a woman would ever do. But when the baby finally came, slipping into the world with an indignant cry, Phoebe felt a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. A daughter, small and perfect, with dark hair like her father and what looked like it might be her mother's gray eyes. Xander, who had been pacing outside on the porch per Martha's firm instructions, burst in at the sound of the baby's cry. He stopped in the doorway, staring at Phoebe holding their daughter, and his face crumpled with emotion. "Come meet your daughter," Phoebe said softly. Xander approached as though the baby might break if he moved too quickly. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking from the blanket. "She is so small," he whispered. "She is perfect," Phoebe said. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names over the past months but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their daughter, Xander said, "Grace. I want to name her Grace because she is a grace we did not earn but received anyway." "Grace Malone," Phoebe said, testing the sound of it. "Yes. That is exactly right." Grace grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby, then into a curious toddler who kept them both constantly busy. She had her father's adventurous spirit and her mother's quick mind, and she was equally at home learning to ride a gentle horse as she was looking at the pictures in the books Phoebe read to her. Life settled into a rhythm over the next few years. Xander's position at the ranch became more secure as Henry Hutchins gave him more responsibility, eventually making him the assistant foreman. The pay increase allowed them to expand their little house, adding a second bedroom and enlarging the kitchen. Phoebe's work with Dr. Preston had evolved into something like a real position, with the doctor relying on her more and more to handle routine cases and minor emergencies. The gossip that had once followed them gradually died away as people saw the simple truth of their lives. They were a hardworking, devoted couple raising a family and contributing to the community. Even some of those who had believed Catherine's lies began to reconsider as the years passed without any sign of the impropriety she had claimed. Catherine herself had moved permanently to Austin and was rarely mentioned anymore. In the spring of 1887, Phoebe gave birth to their second child, a son they named Samuel after Xander's father. Sam was quieter than Grace had been, more thoughtful, with Phoebe's serious gray eyes and a way of watching everything carefully before committing himself. With 2 children, the little house felt even smaller, but it also felt full in the best possible way. Full of laughter and love, of small adventures and ordinary moments that Phoebe treasured like jewels. Grace teaching Sam to walk by holding his hands and pulling him along. Xander coming home at sunset and swinging both children into the air while they shrieked with delight. The 4 of them sitting together on the porch in the evening, watching the stars come out over the ranch land. One evening when Grace was 5 and Sam was 2, Phoebe and Xander sat together after putting the children to bed. They were both tired, the kind of bone-deep tired that comes from working hard and raising small children, but it was a good tired. "You ever think about that blizzard?" Xander asked suddenly. "About the cave where we met." "Sometimes," Phoebe said. "Especially when the wind blows cold. I remember how frightened I was, how certain I was going to die, and then you appeared like something out of a story." "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever seen," Xander said. "Half frozen and lost and scared, but you did not fall apart. You just kept going." "I did not feel brave," Phoebe said. "I felt terrified. Brave is not the same as fearless," Xander said. "It is being afraid and doing what needs doing anyway." Phoebe leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, breathing in the familiar scent of horse and leather and him. "I love this life we have built," she said. "It is nothing like what I imagined when I was a girl in Philadelphia. It is better, more real, more mine." "Ours," Xander corrected gently. "Everything we have built, we built together." In the summer of 1889, tragedy struck the ranch. A lightning strike started a prairie fire that swept across the southern section of the property. Xander and all the hands fought for 2 days and nights to contain it, digging fire breaks and beating out flames until they were black with soot and exhausted beyond measure. They managed to save most of the cattle and all the buildings, but Henry Hutchins, who was 62 and had a weak heart, collapsed from the exertion and died 2 days later. The entire ranch community mourned. Henry had been more than a boss to Xander. He had been a mentor and a friend, the man who had stood by him when everyone else doubted. Martha was devastated, and Phoebe spent weeks helping the widow arrange affairs and settle the estate. Henry had no children, and his will surprised everyone. He left the entire ranch to Martha with the provision that she retain Xander as foreman with a share of the profits. It was an extraordinary gesture of trust, and Xander was deeply moved. "He saw something in me when I was just a kid with nothing," Xander said, reading and rereading the will. "He gave me a chance, and he never stopped believing in me. I do not know how to live up to that." "You already have," Phoebe said. "Everything you have done, every day you have worked with integrity and dedication, that was how you lived up to it. And you will continue to honor him by running this ranch the way he would have wanted." Martha decided to stay on at the ranch house for a few more years, but she made it clear she would retire eventually and expect Xander and Phoebe to move into the main house and take full control. It was a responsibility that both thrilled and terrified them, but they knew they were ready. As foreman, Xander worked even harder, determined to prove that Henry's faith in him had not been misplaced. The ranch prospered under his management. He treated the hands fairly, paid them well, and created a work environment where men stayed for years instead of drifting from job to job. Phoebe managed the ranch accounts and the household, her education and quick mind making her invaluable. She also finally achieved a long-held dream. With Xander's encouragement and financial support, she began formal medical training through a correspondence course with a progressive medical college in the East. It was not the same as attending medical school in person, but it was more than she had ever hoped to achieve. She studied at night after the children were in bed, reading by lamplight until her eyes burned, and Xander would sit with her, reading his own ranching manuals and journals, keeping her company in her studies. In 1891, Phoebe passed her examinations and received a certificate qualifying her to practice medicine. Texas law in that era did not strictly require medical licenses, especially in rural areas, and Dr. Preston formally hired her as his assistant. She began seeing patients on her own under his supervision, and the community gradually accepted her in this role. Women especially sought her out, appreciating the chance to see a female doctor for their ailments. Grace, now 8, announced that she wanted to be a doctor just like her mother. Sam, at 5, was still trying to decide between being a cowboy like his father or a doctor like his mother, or possibly both at the same time. In the fall of 1892, Martha Hutchins decided it was time to retire to town. She moved into a comfortable house in Dallas, near her sister, and Xander and Phoebe moved into the ranch house with their children. It felt strange at first, living in the big house that had always belonged to Henry and Martha, but they gradually made it their own. Phoebe established a proper medical office in one of the rooms, with shelves for supplies and instruments and a separate entrance so patients could come directly without going through the family areas. Xander built a new barn and expanded the corral facilities. Grace and Sam each got their own bedrooms, though they often ended up sleeping in the same room anyway, whispering and giggling until Phoebe had to go in and separate them. The years passed in a blur of work and family and growth. The Double Bar H continued to thrive, becoming known as one of the best-run ranches in the region. Phoebe's medical practice grew as well, and she began training other women who wanted to learn healing arts, creating an informal network of female healers across the county. Grace, at 13, was already helping in the medical office, showing a natural talent for the work. Sam, at 10, was his father's shadow, learning everything Xander could teach him about ranching and livestock. In the summer of 1896, a visitor came to the ranch. Phoebe was in her office treating a ranch hand's sprained wrist when one of the other hands knocked on the door. "Madam, there is a lady here to see Mr. Malone," he said. "Says her name is Mrs. Morris." Phoebe felt a chill despite the warm day. She finished wrapping the sprain and sent the ranch hand on his way, then went to find Xander. He was in the barn, and she told him quietly about their visitor. Xander's face hardened. After all these years, what could she possibly want? "I suppose we should find out," Phoebe said. Catherine Morris, now in her late 30s, still beautiful but with hard lines around her mouth and eyes, waited in the front parlor. She stood when they entered, and her gaze swept over them both with an expression that might have been envy or resentment or both. "Xander," she said. "Phoebe. Thank you for seeing me." "What can we do for you, Catherine?" Xander asked, his tone carefully neutral. Catherine twisted her hands together, a gesture that seemed oddly nervous for someone usually so composed. "I have come to apologize," she said abruptly, "for what I said about you all those years ago, for the lies I told." Silence filled the room. Phoebe and Xander exchanged glances. "Why now?" Phoebe asked. Catherine sank into a chair uninvited, suddenly looking older than her years. "My husband left me," she said bluntly. "Ran off with his clerk, a young man not even 20. Took most of my money with him. I am left with nothing but debt and a ruined reputation." She laughed bitterly. "Ironic, is it not? I destroyed your reputation with lies, Xander, and now mine is destroyed by truth." "I am sorry for your troubles," Xander said carefully, "but I still do not understand why you are here." "Because I am trying to make amends," Catherine said. I am trying to be a better person than I was. My father died last year, and in his last days, he told me that the worst thing he had ever done was helping me spread those lies about you. He said he had watched you build a good life despite what we did, and it shamed him. Tears welled in her eyes. He made me promise I would apologize, that I would tell the truth. Phoebe looked at this woman who had caused Xander so much pain, who had tried to ruin him out of spite and wounded pride. She felt pity for her, but also a deep wariness. "What do you want from us?" Phoebe asked. "Nothing," Catherine said. "Just to say I am sorry, to tell you that everything I said about Xander was a lie and that I have regretted it ever since. Not because of the consequences to me, but because I knew it was wrong even when I was doing it." She looked at Xander directly. "You were a good man who did not want to marry me, and I could not accept that, so I tried to destroy you. I am deeply, truly sorry." Xander was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I appreciate you telling us this. It takes courage to admit you were wrong. Will you forgive me?" Catherine asked. Xander looked at Phoebe, and she saw the question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, knowing that forgiveness was not the same as forgetting, but that holding on to old anger would only hurt them. "Yes," Xander said, "I forgive you. What you did caused me pain, but it also led me to Phoebe, to this life I have now. I would not trade that for anything." Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "You have a beautiful family, a wonderful life. I am glad. Truly, I hope you will be happy together for many years to come." She left soon after, and they never saw her again. But her apology, late though it was, felt like closing a door that had been left open for too long. That evening, after the children were in bed, Phoebe and Xander sat together on the porch as they had so many times over the years. The summer air was warm and filled with the sounds of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "You think she really meant it?" Phoebe asked. "The apology?" "I think so," Xander said. "Losing everything has a way of clarifying what matters." She hit rock bottom and decided to try to climb back up by making amends. "I almost felt sorry for her," Phoebe admitted. "I did too," Xander said. "But more than that, I felt grateful. Grateful for what we have, for the life we have built. If things had gone differently, if she had not ended our engagement, I might have married her and been miserable. I might never have been at that line camp to find you in the blizzard." Phoebe leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Everything that happened led us here," she said. "All the pain and struggle and hardship, it all mattered because it brought us together." "I would go through it all again," Xander said, "if it meant ending up right here with you." The years continued to roll past, bringing changes and challenges and joys. In 1898, Grace at 15 decided she wanted to attend medical school back east, at one of the new colleges that accepted women. It was a wrenching decision for all of them, knowing she would be so far away, but Xander and Phoebe both encouraged her dreams. They scraped together the money for tuition, and saw her off on the train with tears and pride in equal measure. Sam, now 13, took on more responsibility with the ranch, showing the same dedication and skill his father had at that age. He also showed an interest in the new agricultural sciences being developed at the land-grant universities, and talked about maybe attending Texas A&M to study animal husbandry. In 1900, Phoebe and Xander celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. The ranch was more prosperous than ever. Their children were thriving, and they looked back on a decade and a half of marriage with satisfaction and deep love. They threw a party at the ranch house, inviting neighbors and friends from Dallas, the ranch hands and their families. Martha Hutchins came out from town, now elderly but still sharp-minded. Dr. Preston attended with his new young wife. Even Mrs. Henderson from the general store came, long since having accepted that her initial disapproval of Phoebe's marriage had been misplaced. As the sun set and lanterns were lit around the yard, Xander pulled Phoebe into a dance. They swayed together to music provided by a couple of ranch hands with a fiddle and guitar, surrounded by people they loved, in a home they had built together. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Malone," Xander said softly. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Malone," Phoebe replied. "Do you remember what I said to you that first night in the cave?" Xander asked. "About having room by the fire and not caring who talks." "I remember everything about that night," Phoebe said. "I meant it then, and I mean it even more now," Xander said. "You are the greatest gift of my life, Phoebe. Everything good I've comes from you." "We built it together," Phoebe reminded him, echoing words they had said to each other many times over the years. "Together," Xander agreed. "Always together." The new century brought new challenges. The automobile began to appear even in rural Texas, promising to change transportation forever. Telephones were installed in Dallas, and there was talk of bringing electrical lines out to the bigger ranches. The world was changing rapidly, but some things remained constant: the need for good land, healthy cattle, and skilled management. In 1902, Sam graduated from Texas A&M with honors and returned to the ranch full of new ideas about scientific breeding and range management. He and Xander worked together to implement these innovations, and the ranch continued to thrive. That same year, Grace graduated from medical school and returned to Texas, setting up practice in Dallas, where she quickly became known as one of the best doctors in the city, male or female. Phoebe continued her own medical work, now focusing more on teaching and training than direct patient care. She had developed a reputation as an excellent instructor, and young women came from all over the state to study with her. In 1905, Grace married a fellow doctor she had met during her residency, a kind and intelligent man named Thomas Green. The wedding was held at the ranch, a joyous celebration that brought together their far-flung family and friends. Watching Grace marry for love, seeing her radiant happiness, Phoebe felt her heart swell with gratitude for everything life had given her. Sam, at 22, had begun courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a spirited young woman named Elizabeth Carter who could ride as well as any man, and had a head for business that impressed even Xander. In 1907, Grace gave birth to Phoebe and Xander's first grandchild, a daughter they named Martha after Martha Hutchins, who had passed away peacefully the year before at the age of 83. Holding that tiny baby, seeing her daughter become a mother, Phoebe felt the beautiful continuity of life, the way love and family extended across generations. Sam and Elizabeth married in 1908 and settled into the foreman's cottage on the ranch, the same house where Phoebe and Xander had started their married life. In 1909, they had twin boys, rambunctious and full of energy, who kept everyone laughing and running. The years of hard work were beginning to tell on Xander. His joints ached more in cold weather, and he tired more easily than he used to. But he still rode out every morning to check on the cattle, still worked alongside the hands, still loved the land and the life with undiminished passion. Phoebe, now in her 50s, had grown into her role as ranch matriarch and community healer with grace and confidence. The shy, uncertain girl who had nearly died in a blizzard had become a woman of substance and respect, beloved by many and feared by none. In the spring of 1910, on a warm evening with wildflowers blooming across the range, Phoebe and Xander took a ride out to the place where he had proposed to her all those years ago. The bluff overlooking the valley was unchanged, the vista still as beautiful as it had been that first time. They sat together on a fallen log, holding hands, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. "We have had a good life," Xander said. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was a young man with nothing but a horse and determination." "The best life," Phoebe agreed. "Full of love and family and purpose." "I hope we have many more years together," Xander said. "But if I died tomorrow, I would die happy, knowing I spent my life loving you and being loved by you." "No dying for either of us any time soon," Phoebe said firmly. "We have grandchildren to spoil and children to help and a ranch to run." "Yes, madam," Xander said with a smile. They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around them, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a love that had weathered every storm. The years rolled on, as years do. In 1915, Grace and Thomas had their third child, another daughter. Sam and Elizabeth added a daughter of their own in 1916, finally getting a girl after the twin boys. The ranch continued to prosper under the partnership of Xander and Sam, the old ways and new ideas blending into something stronger than either alone. Phoebe celebrated her 60th birthday in 1918, surrounded by children and grandchildren, by friends and colleagues. She looked around at the full house, at the faces of people she loved, and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. Dr. Preston had retired the year before, and there was serious talk in Dallas about building a small hospital, with Phoebe and Grace both involved in the planning. It would be one of the first rural hospitals in Texas to have female doctors on staff, a testament to how much the world had changed in the 35 years since that winter blizzard. In 1920, Xander turned 65. He finally agreed to step back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, handing full control to Sam, though he remained involved in major decisions. He spent his days working on projects around the ranch at a more leisurely pace, playing with his grandchildren, and sitting on the porch with Phoebe in the evenings. "I never thought I would be the type to retire," he admitted one evening, "but I find I like it. I have spent 47 years working from dawn to dusk. It is nice to slow down, to have time to just sit and appreciate what we have built." "You have earned the rest," Phoebe said. She herself had cut back her medical practice, seeing only occasional patients and focusing more on her teaching. They were sitting on that porch, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before, when Xander suddenly took Phoebe's hand. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Something I have never properly put into words." "What is it?" Phoebe asked, hearing the seriousness in his tone. "When I found you in that blizzard, when I brought you to the cave and sat by the fire with you, I knew even then that you were special," Xander said. "There was something about you, a strength and kindness and intelligence that drew me like nothing else ever had. And every day since then, every single day for 36 years, you have proven that initial instinct right. You have been my partner, my best friend, my love. You have made me a better man than I ever would have been without you." Phoebe felt tears sting her eyes. "You saved my life that night," she said. "Not just from the cold, but in every way that matters. You gave me a home, a purpose, a family. You loved me when I had nothing, and you have loved me through everything that came after. I am the luckiest woman in the world." "I am the lucky one," Xander said. "I got room by the fire for a freezing woman, and it turned out she would warm my whole life." They kissed then, a gentle kiss full of 36 years of love and partnership, of trials weathered and joys shared. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that makes you glad to be alive. The ranch bustled with activity as it always did, with Sam directing the hands, Elizabeth managing the household, and grandchildren running and playing in the yard. Phoebe was in her medical office, organizing supplies, when she heard the commotion outside. Her heart sank before she even knew why, some instinct warning her that something was wrong. She ran outside to find ranch hands carrying Xander toward the house. He had collapsed while working in the barn, they said. Just fell over without warning. Grace, who happened to be visiting, was already examining him as they laid him on the sofa in the parlor. Phoebe pushed through to kneel beside her husband, taking his hand. Xander's eyes fluttered open and he focused on her face. "Phoebe," he whispered. "I am here," she said, her voice breaking. "I am right here." Grace looked at her mother with tears streaming down her face, and Phoebe knew. She knew what her daughter was going to say before the words came out. "His heart, Mama. It is failing. I do not think there is anything we can do." Phoebe held Xander's hand tighter, brought it to her lips. Around them, the family gathered. Sam and Elizabeth, Grace and Thomas. The grandchildren kept back but watching with wide, frightened eyes. 65 good years, Xander murmured, his voice faint. "And 36 of them with you. That is more than any man deserves. Do not leave me," Phoebe whispered. "Please, not yet." "I do not want to," Xander said. His eyes found hers and they were full of love. "But I need you to promise me something. Promise me you will keep living, really living. Keep helping people, keep teaching, keep being the remarkable woman you are." "I promise," Phoebe said through her tears. But even as she spoke, she felt the reality she had been denying start to sink in. The strong, steady man who had been her rock for more than 3 decades was slipping away, and all her medical knowledge, all her training and skill could not stop it. "Grace will take care of you," Xander said, his breathing growing more labored. "And Sam. They are good children. We raised them well." "We did," Phoebe agreed. "We did everything right, Xander. We built something beautiful." "I love you," Xander said. "From that first night by the fire until my last breath, I love you." "I love you too," Phoebe said. "Always, forever." Xander squeezed her hand weakly. Then his eyes closed and his breathing slowed and stopped. The silence that followed was terrible. Grace checked for a pulse, then shook her head, tears falling freely now. Sam made a choked sound of grief. The grandchildren began to cry, not fully understanding but feeling the weight of the loss nonetheless. Phoebe sat holding Xander's hand, unable to believe that the man who had been so alive just hours ago was gone. Her partner, her love, her best friend for 36 years. The hole his absence left felt impossibly vast, a chasm that she could not imagine ever filling. The days that followed passed in a blur of grief. The funeral was held at the ranch, with what seemed like half of Texas turning out to pay respects. Ranch hands and neighbors, people from Dallas, former patients and friends. They came to honor a man who had lived with integrity and died beloved. Martha's grave was in the small family cemetery on the ranch property, next to Henry's. Xander was laid to rest beside them, with a simple stone that read, "Xander Malone, 1855–1920. Beloved husband, father, and friend. He lived with honor and loved without reservation." In the weeks after the funeral, Phoebe moved through her days like a ghost. She did what needed doing, but without joy or engagement. The house felt empty even when it was full of family. The bed felt too large. The silence at breakfast, where she and Xander had always shared their plans for the day, was deafening. Grace and Sam were worried about her, she knew. They hovered and fussed, trying to make sure she was eating and sleeping and not spending too much time alone. She appreciated their concern, but she also needed the solitude to process her grief. One evening, about a month after Xander's death, Phoebe found herself walking out to the bluff where he had proposed. It was the first time she had been there since that last visit they had made together the year before. She sat on the fallen log and looked out at the valley, watching the sun set in brilliant colors. And for the first time since Xander had died, she felt something other than numbness. She felt his presence, not in any supernatural way, but in the memories that flooded through her. His voice, his laugh, his steady presence. The thousands of sunsets they had watched together, the countless conversations, the comfortable silences. She remembered their last conversation, remembered the promise she had made. "Keep living," he had said. "Really living." Phoebe took a shaky breath and let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since his death. She cried for all the years they had shared and all the years they would not have. She cried for the beautiful, imperfect, wonderful life they had built together. And she cried because she missed him with an ache that felt physical. But when the tears finally stopped, when she wiped her eyes and stood up, she felt something else too. A determination. A resolve. She would not betray the promise she had made. She would keep living for herself and for him. She would honor his memory by continuing the work they had started together. Phoebe returned to her medical practice with renewed energy. She threw herself into planning for the new hospital in Dallas, using her grief as fuel for positive action. She continued teaching young women who wanted to enter the healing professions. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew what kind of man he had been. The ranch continued to thrive under Sam's management. He consulted Phoebe on major decisions, respecting her knowledge and experience. But he was his own man, running things with a blend of his father's wisdom and his own modern ideas. Grace's practice in Dallas flourished, and she became known as one of the leading doctors in the region. The hospital project moved forward, and in 1922, the Dallas County Hospital opened with both Phoebe and Grace on staff. It was a proud moment, seeing the culmination of years of work, though Phoebe wished deeply that Xander could have been there to see it. Time, that great healer, gradually eased the sharp edge of Phoebe's grief. She would never stop missing Xander, would never stop wishing for one more conversation, one more sunset together. But she learned to live with the loss, to carry it as part of her rather than letting it crush her. In 1925, on what would have been their 41st wedding anniversary, Phoebe organized a celebration at the ranch. The whole family gathered, now expanded to include great-grandchildren. They shared a meal, told stories about Xander, laughed and cried together. That evening, Phoebe stood on the porch where she and Xander had spent so many hours, looking out at the land they had loved. Sam came to stand beside her, now in his late 30s, and looking more like his father every year. "He would be proud of all this," Sam said, gesturing at the thriving ranch, "of what we have all become. He would be proud of you especially," Phoebe said. "You have taken everything he taught you and built on it. You are an excellent rancher and a good man." "I learned from the best," Sam said. He put his arm around his mother's shoulders. "Are you happy, Mama?" Truly, Phoebe considered the question seriously. Was she happy? She missed Xander every day, would carry that loss for the rest of her life. But she was surrounded by family who loved her. She was still doing meaningful work. She had a life full of purpose and connection. "Yes," she said, "I am happy. It is a different kind of happiness than when your father was alive, a quieter sort, but it is real. I have been blessed beyond measure, Sam, blessed with love and family and a life worth living." Phoebe continued her work at the hospital for several more years, finally retiring fully at 70. By then, both Grace and Sam had given her so many grandchildren and great-grandchildren that she sometimes lost count. The house was always full of young voices, of energy and life. She spent her final years in contentment, gardening and reading, and spending time with family. She took pride in the legacy she and Xander had built together, a thriving ranch that had provided employment and livelihood for hundreds of people over the decades. A family of strong, capable, loving individuals who carried their values into the next generation, a tradition of medical care that had helped thousands of patients. On a warm spring evening in 1930, at the age of 72, Phoebe Ashford Malone passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was laid to rest beside Xander in the family cemetery, their graves side by side as they had been side by side in life, her stone read. Phoebe Ashford Malone, 1858–1930. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and healer. She lived with courage and loved without reservation. The ranch continued for generations after them, their descendants carrying on the traditions they had established. The Dallas County Hospital grew and expanded, eventually naming a wing in honor of Phoebe and Grace's pioneering work. Their story became part of family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The story of how a cowboy with a damaged reputation found a freezing woman in a blizzard and gave her room by the fire, not caring who talked. How that simple act of decency and courage had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that endured long after they were gone. It was a story of two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over propriety, who had built a life of meaning and purpose together. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important moments are the ones where we decide to do what is right regardless of the cost, where we open our hearts to possibility despite the risks. And most of all, it was a story of love. Real, deep, enduring love. The kind of love that saves lives and builds families and changes the world in quiet, essential ways. The kind of love that reminds us what it means to be fully human, fully alive, fully ourselves. Years would pass, decades would turn to centuries, but the core truth of their story remained. That cold winter night in 1883, when Xander Malone found Phoebe Ashford dying in a blizzard and said those simple, powerful words, was the night both their lives truly began. Everything else, all the joy and struggle and triumph that followed, grew from that single moment of connection and courage. And in the end, that is what mattered. Not the gossip or the hardships or the struggles they faced. Just that they found each other, chose each other, and built a life of love together. That was the real story, the true legacy. A legacy that lived on in every descendant who valued integrity over reputation, who chose compassion over propriety, who understood that the most important thing in life is loving well and being loved in return. The Double Bar H Ranch still stands in Texas, still run by Malone descendants, a testament to the man and woman who built it with work and wisdom and love. And on quiet evenings when the wind blows across the prairie and the sun sets in brilliant colors, it is not hard to imagine two figures sitting on the porch, holding hands, watching the land they loved. Together, as they always were. Together, as they always would be. Their story, like all great love stories, never really ends. It just continues in different forms through different lives, carrying forward the essential truth they discovered that winter night. That love, real love, is worth any cost. That saving someone's life is the beginning, not the end. And that sometimes the greatest adventures start with the simplest acts of kindness and courage. Xander Malone told a freezing woman he had room by the fire, and he did not care who talked. In doing so, he saved not just her life but his own. Together, they created something beautiful and lasting, a love that warmed them through every storm, a partnership that made them both better and stronger. And that, in the end, is everything.